Lonely people are 7 times more likely than non-lonely people to say they are active in politics. For people who feel disrespected and unseen, politics is a seductive form of social therapy. Politics seem to offer a comprehensible moral landscape. We, the children of light, are facing off against them, the children of darkness. Politics seems to offer a sense of belonging.
It doesn't follow that because more lonely people are drawn to politics, that politics itself is bad, right? This is data, but the data needs to be interpreted. And data like this isn't always clear cut, the conclusions that we can draw from it. But certainly it would not follow that therefore politics is a bad thing.
No, because there might be justified reasons to get angry and upset about political things. Because as he's going to go on to say rightly in the sermon, laws are based in morality. And so when you live in a country or a state or a town like we do that passes immoral laws, then anger or being upset about that seems to be justified.
October 22nd. If you are one of our top tier elite godly podcast listeners, then you're listening to this podcast on October 22nd because that's when it dropped. That's when it comes out every Tuesday. And so for those of you who are listening to this on October the 22nd, number one, thank you for being part of the elite group. And if you're not, if it's like October the 23rd, 24th or later and you're listening to this for the first time, let me just say, shame on you. But for those who are listening today, when the podcast releases, we do want to get one important announcement out that we have been announcing for the last few weeks, but we have a free live stream event really dealing with the most asked about topic. It's probably the most prevalent question and issue out there for 21st century parents. It's technology. It's digital technology. It's screens. It's social media. All that encompasses. We got a free live stream on Tuesday night, October the 22nd.
So
tonight, if you're listening today, and 6 p.m. Pacific time, we are going to be with Gen Z expert Jonathan Morrow, and he is going to help us navigate kind of this whole topic. He's going to talk about some of the recent research, some of the stuff that's come out recently about social media, about screens, and then give us some really practical things that we can do as adults.
He's created a really awesome resource for us as parents, and so that's what we're going to be pointing people towards through the webinar. Because we want to, on the Maven Parent podcast, we point you to resources, good books, all those things. So tonight will be one of those resources we're going to point you to.
Yeah. And he's going to give us some really good information that will hopefully whet your appetite to say, I definitely need to go much deeper. And then we've got a really good practical resource. So anyway, tune in tonight. Go to the Maven website, maventruth.com, and the banner will pop up for the live stream. You can click on that, get all the information. Okay. All right. Well, I guess because we don't have enough controversy in our lives, we decided to dip our toes in some controversy. And there's a big day coming up next month. November 5th, 2024. That is a general election. We will be electing the next president of the United States. And as we regularly talk about here, one of our main goals is to take the Christian worldview, a biblical worldview, and apply it to every single area of life and do that not only for ourselves, but for the next generation. We want to think biblically, think Christianly about every single area of life. That doesn't just mean the quote unquote spiritual things. That's not just thinking about how do we study the Bible, or how should we pray, or how should we do family life, or how should we be moral. Those are all vital topics. But does Christianity have anything to say about psychology, about the social sciences, about technology, about entertainment, about economics, about politics? And we would say that if Christianity is the truth about everything, then it is the truth about everything. It should weigh in on everything. It should give us direction on every single area of life, including this really huge area of life, politics.
Do you think that because you're a Christian nationalist? Is that why you think that?
I have recently converted to Christian nationalism because I think that we should say prayer in schools. I'm a Christian nationalist. That's a whole nother debate. Erin, we're not getting into that. Unless you want us to get canceled, we will not let people know privately that you're, or publicly that you're a Christian nationalist. No, hey, that's another topic. So we're just taking the larger general topic of politics.
Yes. And I joke about it because oftentimes if Christians talk about politics, then nowadays, then that's the label. It's like, oh, you're a Christian nationalist, meaning you're trying to blend. I mean, oftentimes you're trying to blend your faith with politics. You're not supposed to do that, Christian. You're supposed to keep them separate. Mm-hmm. You seem to be suggesting we should bring this under the Christian worldview.
Yeah,
and we're not the first to suggest this, of course.
That's a great clarification, I think, in kind of some of the more recent discourse, public discourse, And if you at all suggest your faith informs politics, you get this label, okay, which is just bad thinking on the culture. But what we're trying to do is say, hey, politics is this important area of life, and the Christian worldview gives us insight into the nature of that thing, helps tell us what it is, and then our relationship to us, or relationship to it, to that area. So let's just, so kind of the question we're answering is, should Christians be involved in politics? And one of the ways that we're going to do that, let's just give our listeners a heads up right now. We are going to kind of use a very recent sermon by a public pastor, someone that people would say is a Christian leader, to kind of help make this discussion a little interesting, to hopefully show some of the good and bad thinking that's out there for Christians. And so we are going to play some clips from Pastor Matt Chandler. Now, look, if you're a Matt Chandler fan or you like his resources, great. We don't have any kind of general warnings or problems with him, his ministry. In fact, I'm not super familiar with the breadth of his ministry. And I've known of him. I think I've one of his books, heard things here and there. Some things I agree with, some things I disagree with, but it's not like we're doing some in-depth thing into his, to his ministry. But
or in some way calling him like a wolf in sheep clothes, or saying that he's not a believer or something like that,
or he's woke or anything like that. And I think in this day and age, we have to be careful of this tribalism of our culture, that's just trying to nudge us into these tribes where it's like me and my people who see the world kind of almost exactly the way I see it, or have the views, my exact views, and therefore anyone kind of outside the tribe is really vilified, or their entire ministry or everything they say is just kind of thrown out based upon one particular area of disagreement. There's a lot of that goes on. And we want to say up front that's not what we're trying to do here. We're wanting to be careful because part of our goal, I think, in the podcast is to teach, to help teach people not just what to think, but how to think through these things. How do you take biblical truth and evaluate everything? How does it inform how you navigate some of these issues? So we want to kind of avoid the tribalism that we see all over, amongst Christians. We want to not just dismiss someone's entire ministry based off of one thing they said. Of course, certainly if it was serious enough, if someone was actually, spouting heresy, they were denying, Trinitarian doctrine or something like that, then yeah, that would be grounds to say, hey, set aside their entire ministry. But even we want to say, look, we can disagree on things. We can do so graciously and intelligently. We can do so firmly. But that doesn't mean that everything that someone says is bad or should be tossed out.
And the reason we're picking this sermon by Matt Chandler, just to give a little background on why we're picking it, because we aren't super familiar with his whole ministry as a whole. But on Twitter, a clip of his sermon was going around where he was criticizing the Republican Party. And so that caught my attention. I listened to the clip and then I thought, oh, this would be good to show the kids. And so I sat down with the 2 kids of ours that are still at home. And I said, okay, guys, listen to this clip and I want to hear your thoughts. And they don't know who he is. I just said, oh, he's a pastor. And so I got our kids' thoughts and they were actually, they were very insightful. And I told you, oh, you won't believe what your kids saw in this clip. And all their criticisms were about the ideas. All of their thoughts were about the ideas that he was saying. It had nothing to do with him. They weren't like, who is this guy? It was just like, oh, well, he said this and this seems to imply this or whatever. And so we had this conversation. Then you said, well, maybe we should just do a podcast on it and help people think through it. So if you aren't on Twitter, you probably haven't seen the clip we're talking about. If you are on Twitter, you maybe have seen it. And so that's what we're talking about
and
today.
This generated a little bit of controversy. And again, that's where sometimes there's more heat than light. And so we thought, hey, this is an opportunity to maybe shed a little bit more light. Think carefully through it.
Heat than light what do you mean by that? I haven't, have you,
You've
is
never
that
heard
like
that
a
cliche?
saying?
Oh, Erin, gosh, you need to be on Twitter more.
Is that where
No.
Oh.
It's just, I'm just saying you're.
More heat than light, so more like everyone's getting up.
Yeah, everyone gets upset
about it
versus
really thinking through it.
Clarity.
Okay.
Heat versus light.
You just said it like we all know what you mean, and I don't know. I haven't heard that before. Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
So I think when it comes to someone like a Matt Chandler, who is, he's the pastor of a local church, is a megachurch in Texas. But he's also, they put their sermons online for public consumption.
Yeah.
And they want it to be a resource to a lot of people, and that's legitimate. But also, there is an aspect of when you are a public figure and you're a leader and you put your ideas out there in the public square, that it's legitimate for others to weigh in and to assess those ideas. Just like our podcast is very public, and if people want to critique our podcast, good luck. Because we are very meticulous in our thinking, very rational, never wrong.
Right.
No, but it's totally fair game. And we would not complain if Matt Chandler made a podcast about our podcast and we got into a podcast war. No. So this is a legitimate enterprise to, even though you don't know somebody, but they put their ideas out there in public to offer some public response and critique. Yeah. Okay, so all that careful framing so that we don't tick people off, because, hey, if you like Matt Chandler, that's totally okay. But we want people to think carefully through the ideas. So couple of not ground rules, but some foundational things here. Number one, okay, what is politics first? Let's just get a definition of politics. Politics can be defined this way. It's the activities that are associated with the governance of a country. Okay. Very broad definition, but it has to do with the governing of a people, the governing of a country. But that governance of a country includes stuff at the federal level, stuff at the state level, stuff at the local level, right? I mean, there's all kinds of layers, particularly in a country like ours, of activities that are associated with governance. So it's the governing of people. And should Christians be involved with that? Well, I would say absolutely yes. We should be involved in politics if it has to do with the governing of our country. Why? Well, we've said it before. We'll say it again. There's 2 commands and 2 commissions that really frame the Christian life and help us to make sense of everything in life. Number 1, the greatest commandment, love God. Number 2, the second great commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And then we've got these 2 great commissions, or the cultural commission, Genesis 1, have babies, make families, be fruitful and multiply, and then subdue the earth, rule over it. Number 2, the Great Commission, proclaim the gospel. Okay, that frames everything. And so then, kind of in that puzzle analogy that we used before, that puzzle piece of politics fits in there. Politics is a way, our involvement in politics is a way to love God and love our neighbor. And we love God by loving our neighbor. And so when you think about the governance of a culture, a country, things like just laws, the punishment of wrongdoers and things like that, those are important aspects. And those are ways that we can love our neighbor. We want to work towards a more just society and nation. And in doing so, we love our neighbor that way. Okay. So that's kind of the big framing. Politics is governance. And I think particularly the 2 great commandments, and then also the cultural mandate. Cultural mandate helps us to fit politics into this idea of ruling over the earth, subduing it. And as we build human culture, then politics is an important part of that. It's necessary for social order. Okay, so we're gonna take this sermon, use it as a foil to kind of talk about politics. We're gonna play a few clips throughout. We're not gonna obviously play the whole thing. You can get the whole thing on YouTube. We'll put it in our show notes and in the comments or whatever, and a link to the actual sermon. And it's a mixed bag. They actually start the sermon with a reading of Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 31. I think that was a good way to start, to read that cultural mandate. And then Chandler gets into kind of 3 primary reasons for this series that they're doing on politics. The title of the sermon series is Thrones and Thorns. And so he's got 3 reasons. Number 1, he wants us to see and savor King Jesus as our primary and only hope, which we would say amen, right? Yeah, our hope is not in any political system. Our hope is not in any political leader. Our ultimate hope is in Christ. It's in the sovereign God of this universe. So we'd say amen to that. No problem there. Then in number 2, he says he's provoked by the political manipulation that's going on that has us all so anxious. All right. And he wants to call out that wickedness. But then he quotes from a guy, kind of a social and political commentator, a guy named David Brooks. And he cites a book, How to Know a Person. And so this is actually one of those things where, this is one of those comments that is given up front that is, I guess it doesn't hit on maybe kind of the central issues, but it's a comment we want to highlight because I think of what it does in terms of maybe suppressing people's pushback, or it's a way to it can be a way to insulate yourself from criticism.
Mm.
And so let's play the clip where he reads this David Brooks quote, and then we'll discuss it.
You and I am deeply provoked by the political manipulation that's going on that has us all so anxious and angry. I can feel in my bones the wickedness that's occurring right in front of us, and I just want to speak to it and call it out. Like this is data from a year ago. Just 4% of U.S. adults say the political system is working extremely well or at all. A growing share of public dislikes both political parties. Nearly 3 in 10 express unfavorable views of both parties, the highest share in 3 decades of polling. A little more than a year. So again, this is a year ago now. I wish I could find more, closer data to today, but I couldn't find it. As we're into this presidential election, nearly 2/3 of Americans, that's 65%, say they always or often feel exhausted, with another 55% saying they feel angry, like consistently angry. More than 8 in 10 Americans, that's 86%, by the way, say the following is a good description of politics. Republicans and Democrats are more focused on fighting each other than on solving any real problems. And then this is a quote from David Brooks's book, How to Know a Person. I commend that book to you. It's excellent. But this quote, when I read it, stuck in me and has fueled some of my frustration and provocation. Lonely people are 7 times more likely than non-lonely people to say they are active in politics. For people who feel disrespected and unseen, politics is a seductive form of social therapy. Politics seem to offer a comprehensible moral landscape. We, the children of light, are facing off against them, the children of darkness. Politics seems to offer a sense of belonging. I am on the barricades with the other members of my tribe. Politics seems to offer an arena of moral action. To be moral in this world, you don't have to feed the hungry or sit with the widow. You just have to be liberal or conservative. You just have to feel properly enraged at the people you find contemptible. Now, behind the truth of that statement, I see men and women that are preyed upon and manipulated in their loneliness and brokenness, whipped into an angry mob by politicians.
Okay, so that's the quote from David Brooks. Lonely people are 7 times more likely than non-lonely people to say that they are active in politics. Okay, I think with something like that, a quote like that, and it's not clear exactly what I think Matt's trying to do with that. Although I'd like to sit with them and just say, hey, why read that quote up front? What does that kind of do to people who would say, Christians are supposed to be involved in politics? And again, what conclusions can you draw from this?
So I think, as he goes on, he talks about how it makes him feel angry that lonely people would kind of be taken advantage of this way. So I think that's the point of it. I think the problem is it condemns or at least casts,
implies kind of a condemnation.
Yes, of politics itself, as if it's not a virtuous enterprise. And so it's kind of sucking in these people who are lonely and kind of don't have anything better to do. That could be pulled from it. And you could make this argument about lonely people, more vulnerable people are more easily pulled into all kinds of things. And so, I mean, we've talked about the transgender movement on the podcast. And one thing about the transgender movement is it is pulling in more young people, more girls, in particular, more girls who are vulnerable because they are on the autism spectrum. And so So that's vulnerable people are easily swayed in all kinds of ways, and they can be manipulated to get upset about things they shouldn't be upset about, think things that aren't true all the time.
Yeah.
So go.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, that doesn't mean that the thing that they're pulled into necessarily is illegitimate or is a bad thing. So, for instance, here, people who feel disrespected, unseen, politics. This is where the quote seems to give it a negative light, right? Politics is a seductive form of social therapy. Politics seems to offer a comprehensible moral landscape. Okay, so we would say, well, it doesn't follow, and this is where we're trying to think through this. It doesn't follow that because more lonely people are drawn to politics, that politics itself is bad, right? This is data, but the data needs to be interpreted. And data like this isn't always clear cut, the conclusions that we can draw from it. But certainly it would not follow that therefore politics is a bad thing.
No, because there might be justified reasons to get angry and upset about political things. Because as he's going to go on to say rightly in the sermon, laws are based in morality. And so when you live in a country or a state or a town like we do, that passes immoral laws, then anger or being upset about that seems to be justified because you know this is going to hurt people in your community.
Yeah, the expression of, maybe we might call it a righteous anger or a proper anger towards injustice or evil,
right?
Which I think Matt would agree with us that there is a proper time to be angry, because he, throughout the message, expresses his anger and his frustration about, vulnerable people being manipulated and things like that, right? Now, I think, so this data needs to be interpreted. It's not clear what follows from this. I mean, I think maybe there's this larger issue of, hey, lonely people in a culture, they're looking for meaning to life. They're not embedded in a community that helps give their life meaning. They're looking for purposes and causes in life, and all kinds of things that are legitimate and illegitimate can serve as that purpose. So whether it's transgenderism, that can serve as, someone advocating for that, pushing for that, being part of that movement, that gives them some meaning.
Yeah.
Or it could be politics.
Or it could be a weird Comic-Con thing. Okay, do you remember we were in the Atlanta airport recently. Yes. Okay, it was weird to me. I'm passing judgment. Okay, so we're in the Atlanta airport and we're walking through the airport and we're like, okay, something's going on. We learned later it was a convention. It wasn't Comic-Con, it was something else, but it was one of these things. But all these adult people are dressed up, wearing costumes.
They were holding signs.
I mean, they identify with this group. They're finding belonging, right, with this group. That obviously I don't, because I'm saying, oh, that's so weird. Okay, so this is what we do as people.
Wait, but you've recently got into anime and something.
There's another example, anime. So we know this is what people do.
Yeah.
And so what?
And now it's not. So this is where, like, we wouldn't say Comic-Con is wrong to attend or take your child to. But what we have is a growing secularism in the society that removes transcendence, removes objective purpose, and so people look for it all over the place. I think what something like this can do, though, reading it up front, can be an attempt, and I'm not saying Chandler's doing this intentionally, but it can be a way to try to insulate yourself from criticism, because you kind of throw out there this quote that, hey, lonely people are way more active in politics. And what it does is it can have a chilling effect on people wanting to offer criticism, because, I don't want I'm not lonely and I don't want to be identified as lonely. And so somehow there's this connection between being politically active and loneliness.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so then it can kind of put a chill on critique.
Yeah.
And this is where I want to say, as a public leader, as a Christian leader, you and I, and particularly you, Erin, we should be open to the critique of our ideas. Okay. And certainly we don't want that to slip into any kind of ad hominems. We don't want there to be personal attacks, and we're not going to do any personal attacks, with Matt Chandler. What we want to do, though, is take his ideas, and all the ideas that we throw out there on the table publicly are open to critique.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to start to, at the beginning of our message, we don't want to kind of have a guilt by association with a quote like this. Like, okay, yeah, it has a way of, I think, trying to prevent maybe some critique, or it kind of chills, puts a chill on the critique.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I hadn't picked up on that. And I guess what my first perception of that when I heard that was, if you're sitting there watching it or in the audience and you care deeply about politics, you are really involved, then that it does kind of make you feel, or at least question, oh, do I care about this stuff because I'm really lonely and I have nothing better to do, kind of thing. Yeah. Now he's going to go on and talk about the ordering of things, and we're going to get into that. But just because you care deeply about it and are invested in the political realm doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. Yeah. And so
so I think there's an informal fallacy in logic. It's called poisoning the well. Okay, poisoning the well is where you give adverse information about kind of your target, and you do that preemptively. You present that information kind of as a preemption, right? With the intention of maybe discrediting the that target person or that target group. So it's kind of, that's what it feels like here, because right afterwards, he then says, after kind of giving this quote, he talks about how some of you have been feeding yourself with political propaganda and you're spring loaded for me, like you're going to come after me. So obviously he's connecting this quote with potential people who are going to push back and critique. And that's just not, that I think is a kind of this poisoning of the well. And we want to say, look, this does not make politics or strong political involvement illegitimate, because there's a loneliness associated with those activities. All right. So I think that's one thing we just wanted to point out ahead of time, because that can have an impact on us. When we hear that kind of thing and we don't recognize it as this fallacy of poisoning the well, then it might cause us to second guess our questioning of the ideas or our involvement in that area, that targeted area that the critique is coming at. Okay. Now, again, we think, hey, starting with Genesis 1 was good. Being provoked by wickedness and wanting to call it out, that's good. In that section, he also talks about how tolerance, we should be tolerant. We should be able to disagree and yet treat people with dignity and respect. And I would say amen, Matt, to that. So there would be agreement there. And then he talks about, why doing 6 weeks on this series. And he talks about platitudes and bumper sticker theology are not helpful. So, hey, they want to do a deeper dive into this. That's great. But even from the get-go, there's this kind of sense when he talks a couple times about politicians. You get the sense, and it's generalized. You lump in all these politicians as people who are merely trying to manipulate us, whip us into a frenzy, control us. And there's this very low view of politicians across the board. I don't think there's any nuance in his answers or any careful distinctions. And so it's kind of throwing all politicians under the bus. And I think with it, kind of dragging all politics into it, kind of presenting maybe a lower view of it or demonizing a little bit of it. Because if you characterize this enterprise of politics and you characterize the politicians as this, they're just trying to manipulate us and control us, then that can, for many people, give more force to your critique.
Yeah.
And we want to say, wait a second, let's have a more careful, balanced, nuanced view, because that's going to be more true to reality. Because we personally know people who are in politics, people who have been politicians, who are very good men and women, men and women of integrity, who truly want to serve the common good, who want to serve their constituents, who aren't there simply for the power, who have sacrificed a great deal, especially at the local level, where they're not getting some huge salary, but they're working hard to serve the people of their city.
Yeah.
And so we want to say, we need to be careful about how we talk about politicians.
It's the same way that pastors and teachers in the church want to be careful how you talk about business as an enterprise as well.
Exactly.
And going to this, well, if you're in business, you're just about greed and making money. And I'm not saying Matt Chandler did that, but this is I think a related thing where you condemn the whole enterprise. And what we don't want to do in the church, and we don't want to do in our homes with our kids, is condemn the whole political enterprise, especially in a country like America that is a republic. It's a democratic republic. We want some of our kids and some of the people in our church to be a part of political leadership. Why? Because hopefully their worldview will inform how they govern and lead people. And so there are people in that audience that maybe would run for school board or for city council or for mayor or for a central committee position or whatever. And you want to encourage that. And you don't want to discourage that. And I think something like this is a discouraging, just like I've heard teaching on business sometimes. And there's this discouragement. Or, I mean, you could take it to any area, teaching in the arts, like, oh, art's like this side thing, but not really like a necessary thing of the church. And so we diminish this whole enterprise of creating beauty in the arts when we diminish it like that. And so we don't want to do that, even with politics, even in a realm that a lot of us would, everyone would agree. Oh, there have been really bad people involved in politics. We all know that. And he gives biblical examples of fallen leaders from Abraham to Moses. And so this fallenness about people, which I think is why the American system, as it was intended, is good, because it's based on checks and balances. So even people in power are supposed to always have a check over them. And so that, to me, is, of course, affirming the Christian worldview that, like Matt said, that every human being has fallenness in them. But we don't want to condemn the whole enterprise. We don't want to do it with our kids, and we don't want to do it in our churches.
If we do, then we strip people of the motivation to go into those areas.
Absolutely.
And what we really want to be doing, I think, is raising up men and women to go into all kinds of vocations to be ambassadors for Christ, to fulfill the cultural mandate and also the Great Commission, right? Those two commissions. And so that's why it's so important not to simply demonize a whole class of people like politicians. Now, we would also admit at the same time, there's a lot of distrust in politicians today. There's a growing distrust. Mm-hmm. And that's actually across the board in all institutions. We could say the same thing about the pastorate. there's a growing distrust in the pastors. And we have all kinds of examples of pastors who have done bad things. But we wouldn't want to throw out the entirety of the pastorate and say that they're all therefore trying to manipulate us and get our money and things like that because you have bad examples. So that this is, again, we want to think carefully through all of these things. Now, Matt starts off by going into some stuff we'd say we'd agree with. I mean, he starts talking about the purpose of this message, right? And this is about 1553, if you're looking for a timestamp. He says he wants to explain what government is and what role we, the people of God, are supposed to play. And he gets into Genesis 1, 26 and 28, talks about the cultural mandate, talks about us ruling and reigning for human flourishing. We're designed to do this. We can't help but do this. We'd say, yep, we agree. I think a good read on that. And then he says it's a mixed bag historically, and then points us to Genesis 3. And we'd say, yeah, this is where the biblical worldview explains why some governors, some governance, some leaders, political leaders, have done really bad things. And so we're with him on that. And, you know, and he gets back to, hey, the kingdom of God. He talks about Mark chapter 1, the kingdom of God. That's where our primary allegiance is. And we are citizens of the U.S., but our primary citizenship is in heaven. We agree with all that. And that is, I think, a good part of his sermon. Okay. And he gets into, now there was a little quibble right around the 25th, 26th minute when he kind of talks about the kingdom of God. And I don't think he would maybe agree with this characterization, but I think it's correct. There's a little bit of a kind of a pitting of kind of reconciliation with God, salvation with the kingdom of God, or a minimizing of salvation, reconciliation. He talks about the good news of the gospel is that we don't have to give our hope and our allegiance to these broken people, broken leadership, leaders of earthly kingdoms. And he does say, hey, salvation's included in this as well. But I would say that's the heart of the gospel is our reconciliation with God. Okay, so minor quibble there, but anyway, I bet it'd be interesting to clarify that with him. He talks about N.T. Wright building for the kingdom, but he kind of refers, again, when he talks about this world and politicians, almost always it seems to be in a negative light. He talks about the quote unquote madness that we were in, and that this is what, we're in the midst of this madness right now because we are coming up to, an election. And you had, I think, a good thought on that is, we talk about some of the political chaos, madness that we're in, but you were like, well, part of it is that's what elections do. It gets the politicians and the issues out on the table in front of us. And so there's a lot of thinking and a lot of dialogue and a lot of cultural conversation about those issues.
Yeah,
right now.
Actually, in a free society, we should expect that when it comes time to vote, ramping up to that, debate will increase. And so this is why we have presidential debates. We've had Senate debates in California because we have a Senate seat that's open, and so they have a debate. And so this actually should be expected and almost appreciated, even though I know it's frustrating at times, but appreciated because the thankfulness that we can actually debate.
Yes.
And that people can actually air their views and disagree with one another. Now, there's a biblical way to do that, and Matt is advocating for that. But it's okay that there's some madness in a sense. I guess so. I just am thinking this is what happens in a free society.
Yeah.
We have to tolerate one another because free speech, voting, all of these things comes with you have to bear with your neighbor. And so that's part of it is it's thing. Okay.
And that's where we got to be careful that we don't turn good things into negatives.
Yeah.
And when I hear that kind of stuff, and we get some of the frustration.
Oh yeah.
Right? And some of the political ads, I think hey, it's good to critique some of the political ads you see that end up just being personal attacks.
Yeah.
And some of the things that a candidate will say about another candidate that's just a personal attack.
Yeah.
That stuff, yeah, that's frustrating.
It's grievous. Actually, I've said to our children several times just this month, civility is lost, and grieving the lack of civility in the debate is appropriate. And especially as a Christian, from a Christian worldview, if you see it from other Christians, it's grievous because you think this is not how it's supposed to be. But actually, I think it would be appropriate in the foyer of your church to hear people debating about policies and things that are happening. I mean, you would hope it would be done in a respectful way, like Matt is advocating for, the true tolerance sense. But having the debates and having things kind of ramp up, I would think we would expect it, and we almost should want it.
Yeah. We should be thankful. And this is the thing that we can pass on to our kids. We should be thankful that we live in a country where there is a freedom of speech, and that there is speech that is protected, and that you don't have to worry about being imprisoned for what you say. Now, of course, when I say that, some of us might sit there and go, whoa, wait a second. There are some concerns about that. Absolutely, there are. And that's why we need to talk about that. And that's why we need to value it and be thankful for it, and also work hard to preserve such things, because that's good for our culture.
Yeah.
So in one sense, we don't want to turn a positive into a negative and say, hey, it's just all this madness and chaos and debates and manipulation. Some of it is really good stuff where it's, hey, we live in a free and open society, the most free and open society the world has ever known. And therefore, these kind of political debates are actually the sign of a good thing.
Yeah.
And again, legitimate frustrations with how some of that's conducted, but this then presents for us as adults a really good opportunity to teach our kids. This is a teachable moment, to play what a candidate says and to then have our kids think through that. You do a great job of this, Erin, with our own kids, where you'll see something and then you'll say, hey, kids, come here, watch this. And then what do you think? And then you'll help them think through that and respond to it. And it just helps them with their critical thinking skills. Okay, that takes us to about the 30-minute mark of Matt Chandler's sermon. And we're going to have to break this up into two parts, because we do want to think carefully through this. And I know at the beginning of this podcast, I remember before we started recording, Erin was like, we got this in one episode. We're going to nail this. And I was like, no, it's going to be two. No, I wasn't. I thought we could do it in one as well. But we just, again, our goal is to think clearly and biblically about this. And so we're kind of taking a fine-tooth comb through this, because as we do that, we hope that it helps you in your development as a thinker, in your development of applying a Christian worldview to everything, so that you can navigate these kinds of things and you can help your kids navigate these kind of things. And I hope you can appreciate that we're not just taking and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That's another cliche, honey.
Ew. I was just about to make fun of you for using an old cliche.
Well,
rude boy.
But
I know the baby with the bathwater one.
I just don't want you to shed more heat than light. Okay.
You know who doesn't know that saying is our kids. Because someone said it the other day, and our 13-year-old was like, what the heck does that mean? And I'm like,
that sounds sick.
You know that saying, the baby out with the bathwater. He's like, no. Yeah. So you're old for saying that.
So for a younger generation, if you're maybe a millennial parent,
listening, maybe they haven't even heard it.
Don't pick on the millennial parents, Erin. Culture does that enough. Okay. No, all right. So, but hopefully you're seeing, we're not being tribal here. We're not just saying, oh, Matt Chandler's woke. What we want to do is take his ideas, seriously consider them, take the good, and kind of spit out the bones, right? And critique those things that are negative. So there's more critique coming.
And it does, I mean, it's funny because we're going to critique a 45-minute sermon and we're going to take, an hour to do it or whatever. But it's because we actually do have to do this sometimes and slow down. I was talking to a group of moms last week, and I was saying how when we scroll so quickly, we oftentimes don't realize the ideas that are we don't even realize ideas are being pushed out. Now, of course, when you're listening to a sermon, you're at least remotely aware that ideas are being pushed out. But you want to think about like what we did, even with the quotes that are chosen. Okay, what's the quote saying? What is it nudging me to think? And does it give evidence of that? And, these sorts of things. So it does actually take time to stop and think. And you can develop the habit of doing this. And I would say the more and more anti-Christian our culture gets, we need to develop this habit in the outside world, but we need to develop the habit in the church too.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
When we're hearing teaching, even on the MAVEN Parent podcast, that you pause and you think, okay, what's the idea
and
that they're pushing?
How right is it? How
what
do
did
these
Brett just
people
say?
get
And
so
did it even
close
make
to
sense?
The truth? No, hopefully you guys are able to appreciate what we're trying to do here. And I hope it serves you well as you try to help your own kids and the next generation, all those kids that you're involved with, whether it's your own kids, your youth group, your kids you're teaching in the classroom. How can we help them navigate the challenges of this world? And one of the things that we must do is equip them with biblical truth to view every single aspect of life.
MAVEN exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out MAVENtruth.com.